it's where it's been so big for Iowa is to have veteran leadership at the linebacker position of Nick Jackson and Jay Higgins because they are able to stop the interior run without any additional safety resources. So
Yep.
I really look forward to that matchup of this. I know Jackson had 100 yards or plus against Iowa last year, but I think it's one of those things where
Dave doesn't stop, does he? He just
no,
keeps
that's
coming
he's
in.
relentless. Uh, he's relentless. And I think the best part about what Iowa's defense does is that's why this game's always so fun because I feel like the two teams kind of they don't shy away from each other's strengths because the strength of Iowa's offense is running the ball. Well, Minnesota usually has a pretty good front seven. The strength of Minnesota, going all the way back to the Glenn Mason days with the Lawrence Maronis and all of that stable of running backs, you know, they still have that. Mo Ibrahim, the most snake bitten running back of the last 5 years from an injury standpoint. And I got to be
Yeah.
honest, I was always very thankful that it seemed that one of his injuries happened, you know, around the Iowa game, and we didn't have to see him in that backfield because that guy was special. And I think that that's going to be fun to watch on Saturday is how they handle the running back.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously Iowa's defense is always going to be good. It feels like they've always been good, but this year in particular, what do you guys think is the biggest weakness to this defense, or what are you most concerned about, maybe specifically about this matchup?
I'll let you take that first, Joel. You're more of the coaching mind.
Corner. Specifically the corner opposite Jamari Harris. Jamari Harris is a veteran. He's played really well. He's played a lot of good football out of Chicago. TJ Hall had a rough day on Saturday. Again, that game was a lot closer than it on the scoreboard than it really felt like when you're watching it in the stadium. And Tori wrote a great column about that this weekend or today on Tuesdays with Torby at HawkeyeReport.com. But the corner position, it's not that they're bad; it's just that there's some inexperience. And so, how do they adjust? One of the touchdowns that looked like it was the corner's fault. Troy ran a really good cover two beater, and they ran a vertical on the outside, and then they ran a post for the number two receiver. Safety carried with the number two on the post. Inexperienced corner peeked to the flat instead of carrying vertical. With the vertical route, and he just got beat by Ross, and it was a big long touchdown. So corner is susceptible. The fastest way to shore that up is Iowa's got to get some more pass rush with their front four, and they've done a nice job with that. They have some real talent up front, and they actually have some depth up front too. So I think the one thing that I have learned from being an Iowa fan, and one thing I've just learned about being in a coach's room and being in the locker rooms, is that the fastest way to shore up your pass defense is to make your quarterback really uncomfortable. And I think that that's the way Iowa's going to try to do that. Is they got a couple guys who can turn the corner, and Minnesota fans watch number 95 on the defensive line, Aaron Graves. In my opinion, he's a top three round draft pick. He's big. He's fast. He made national news as a high school as being the first guy in Iowa to play in a playoff basketball game and wrestle in the state wrestling tournament the same day.
Wow.
So he's a
Wow.
freak athlete, and he's kind of Carl Klug like, but he's also got a lot of comparisons to Nebraska great Ndamukong Suh from a physical tool standpoint. So if Iowa can rush the passer, the secondary will have no issues.
I'm not going to repeat what Joel said about the corners. It definitely is the concern, and yeah, Cooper DeJean is not back there anymore either, and he was a shutdown. So you've got that situation.
Well, it
As
just
always,
seems that. Go
under
ahead.
Phil
Sorry.
Parker, they have a lot of good people, but they're still learning. But to your point, what I'm really curious to see, Joel, is they have not dialed up any pressure this year. I mean, that I was actually pretty irritated by the lack of it at the second half against Iowa State. They just let the quarterback sit back there and pick them apart too
Are you
often.
talking about blitzing?
A little bit. I don't feel like they've done it as much or as effectively
Yeah.
as you might expect. So I'll be curious to see if they do a little bit more of that with Minnesota.
Minnesota's offensive attack lends itself to more blitzing than Iowa State. With Iowa State and their more spread offense and getting the ball out of the quarterback's hands in 3 steps, blitzing's really dangerous. So I can see why they didn't blitz as much against Iowa State. So we'll see if they dial up some pressure. Nick Jackson's a pretty good blitzer too. So we'll see if they get it from the linebacker position so that we can keep the back four intact.
Yeah. So I just wanted your guys' opinion on this. The last 2 games, Minnesota, like I've mentioned it a couple times, you guys now, we've been passing to run the ball. Very different approach than what we've seen out of PJ's offenses in the past. I'm having a tough time picturing what that even looks like against Iowa because it's been so conservative against you guys in the past. And your defense is great. Is Iowa, if that is the approach, does Iowa just sit tight in coverage and make Minnesota try and beat them deep? I know you mentioned the corners had some struggles and they've given up some, but if I'm Iowa, I'm picturing myself just sitting tight on that underneath stuff, quick outs, which kind of what the Gophers passing game has been, especially on early downs. I don't know. What do you guys think
I
about
mean,
that?
I think the reason teams get a little bit of cold feet about trying to pass to beat Iowa is that if you get behind the chains too fast, if you don't make something on first down, if you have an incomplete pass and then they get to pin their ears back and come at, I mean, you can go from second and 10 to third and 14 to getting a pick six or a sack and then a shitty or crummy punt right away, and the next thing you know, you're in deep trouble. So it makes sense that teams want to tread a little carefully when they're playing that kind of a defense because Iowa wants to give up nothing. And so the key, and I think what Troy actually did well is they did run dink, run dink, run dink, run dink. Oh my gosh, bomb. Like I think that's how you get to Iowa. You have to like just kind of lull them into a pattern and then bam, unleash something. And if you got a guy that can take the top off, that's how I'd do it. How about you, Joel?
Yeah, and I don't know if there's a Rashad Bateman, sitting on the sideline in Minnesota this year like there has been in the past, where they've had some elite receivers, elite in PJ Flex terms. I think that the thing that makes that approach so dangerous is that Iowa's comfortable being patient with you, and I think that's when you talk to former Iowa players, especially some of the defensive backs. When they talk about what it's like to play for Phil Parker, because it's a unique situation where the defensive backs coach is also the defensive coordinator, where a lot of coaches will build their defense from the front back. Iowa kind of builds their defense from the back forward, and when it comes to some of the cerebral parts. So there's a lot of discipline. There's a lot of patience in that zone coverage that they play, and they'll let you get 6 yards. They'll let you get 7 yards. But then when that field compresses, now all of a sudden that 7 yards becomes 3, and all of a sudden now you're throwing it into a tight window. Oh, and here comes an NFL linebacker, Jay Higgins, underneath to pick it and take the ball away. So I think that's where Iowa can be so frustrating for quarterbacks. And I know your guy has come from New Hampshire, which is a powerhouse FCS program, has great history. Chip Kelly, Ryan Day, all of those guys. So he's seen some good competition, but I'm not sure he's seen a defense that's this patient, that's this willing to let you make a mistake and force you into making a mistake. And I think that's where quarterbacks panic, is when they see all the eyeballs staring right at them when they're dropping
Yeah.
back the pass, and here
Yeah.
comes,
To,
and
to,
that's
to,
where mistakes happen.
and to build on that, to Joel's point is the way Iowa State was able to pull the upset on Iowa was by they only turned the ball over once and not at super critical time. And Iowa did turn it over twice. Now, granted, one was at the last pass Hail Mary, so it was more of a wash. But yeah, if you can keep the turnover battle even, that's how you have your best shot to take down Iowa.
I'm just gonna let you know, Gopher fans are gonna be excited by that to an extent, just because Brosmer is supposed to. That's supposed to be his trait, is the cerebral guy, right? Knowing where the football should go. obviously it's different when there's an elite defense coming at you every play. So it's going to be, I'm
Fun matchup.
super fascinated to see how that plays out.
And the bigger factor is it's the second guy coming in on a tackle is going to try to take that ball away. There's very few teams that are as disciplined at trying to take the ball away as Iowa is. The other coaches who do it, Nick Saban did it at Alabama. Nick Saban was Phil Parker's position coach at Michigan State. So, I mean, there's a lot of DNA that goes back decades of how to play this game the right way. And it's Iowa just doesn't beat themselves very often. They did against Iowa
No.
State. They did against Iowa State. They had busted coverage that turned into a game-winning field goal opportunity. So they've had 2 games in a row where they've had some busted coverage. How can Iowa fix that? I would imagine that's been a big focus this week in the defensive meeting room.
And I think actually that could play into Minnesota's favor because I feel like Iowa's going to be particularly concerned about getting beat deep. So I think if again, if your quarterback's patient and the way Iowa's been beaten by teams in the past is by the dink and dunk offense, if you're patient and willing, it's funny because I just said the way to beat Iowa is to throw it deep, right? Well, now I'm like 2 steps ahead. It's like
It's
a
got to
chess
be a
game.
mix.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's like a chess game. Is that now Iowa's going to be concerned about that? So is the short and intermediate pass game going to be more open than it typically would? That's what I'd be curious